Not offering, Principessa. Promising. He leaned in closer, his mouth near her ear, his voice dropping to an intimate rumble that she felt all the way to her toes. I promise that if you give me one dance, one real conversation without this defensive wall you're hiding behind, I'll show you exactly why everyone in this club has been watching us with either envy or fear for the past 5 minutes. I'll show you what it feels like to have my complete attention, my complete focus. And then, if you still want to walk away, if you can honestly say you feel nothing, I'll let you go and never bother you again. The bass line thundered through Club Noir's marble floors with such intensity that Lila Morgan could feel it vibrating through her ribcage, matching the wild rhythm of her heartbeat as she threw her head back in laughter. The strobe lights painted kaleidoscope patterns across the packed dance floor, illuminating bodies moving in synchronized chaos. Drinks held high, inhibitions dropped low. It was Friday night in Manhattan, and the city's elite had descended upon this particular establishment like beautiful, expensive moths drawn to flame. Lila stood near the VIP section with her best friend Maya Rodriguez, both of them dressed to kill in outfits that had cost more than they should have but felt absolutely worth it for nights like these. Nights when they could pretend, just for a few hours, that they belonged in this world of wealth and privilege rather than serving it. At 26 years old, Lila had perfected the art of existing between worlds. By day, or rather by evening, she was a server at Celestino's, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurants, where she smiled graciously at patrons who spent more on a single bottle of wine than she made in a week. She'd been doing it for 4 years now, ever since graduating top of her class from Parsons School of Design with a degree in fashion and a mountain of student debt that made her monthly payments feel like voluntary indentured servitude. The restaurant job was supposed to be temporary, just until she could save enough to open her own design studio, create the sustainable fashion line she'd been dreaming about since sophomore year when she discovered you could make gorgeous, wearable art from recycled materials and ethical sourcing. But New York was expensive, brutally so, and half her paycheck went straight to helping with her mother's medical bills back in Connecticut. Her father had left when she was 12, deciding that the responsibility of a family with mounting healthcare costs wasn't the adventure he'd signed up for, leaving Lila and her mother to navigate the nightmare of American healthcare alone. So the temporary restaurant job had stretched from months into years, and her design dreams got filed away in the ever-growing folder labeled Someday that lived in the back of her mind alongside other deferred hopes. Tonight, though, wasn't about responsibility or deferred dreams or the weight of reality that pressed down on her shoulders like Atlas carrying the world. Tonight was about dancing with Maya, about feeling young and free and beautiful, about pretending that life was as simple as music and movement and the particular brand of feminine power that came from wearing a dress that fit perfectly and knowing you looked good in it. Maya had insisted on this outing, claiming Lila needed to remember how to have fun instead of just working yourself into an early grave. And for once, Lila had agreed without much argument. She was mid-laugh at something Maya had shouted over the music when she felt it, that peculiar prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the one that told her she was being watched with an intensity that went beyond casual observation. Lila had worked in service long enough to recognize the weight of attention, could usually tell within seconds whether someone was looking at her with appreciation, with calculation, or with something darker. This felt like all three combined into something she couldn't quite categorize, something that made her skin heat and her pulse quicken with an awareness that was part wariness and part something she didn't want to examine too closely. She turned, following that invisible line of connection, and found herself staring directly at him across the crowded club. He stood in the elevated VIP section that overlooked the main dance floor like a throne room surveying its kingdom, and even from this distance, even through the crowd and the lights and the chaos, Lila felt the impact of his gaze like a physical thing. He was tall. She could tell that even with him standing still, with the kind of powerful build that suggested strength held carefully in check, violence that could be unleashed at a moment's notice but currently remained leashed by choice rather than necessity. His dark hair was swept back from his face in a style that probably cost more than her rent, revealing features that belonged on classical sculptures in museums, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked like it had been carved with a straight edge, and a mouth that somehow managed to look both cruel and sensual at the same time. But it was his eyes that held her captive, even across the distance separating them. Dark, almost black in the club's lighting, they burned with an intensity that made something low in Lila's stomach clench with awareness and warning in equal measure. He wasn't just looking at her. He was studying her, cataloging her, claiming her with his gaze in a way that should have felt violating but instead felt like a challenge she couldn't quite resist rising to meet. He wore a suit that screamed money and power, black, perfectly tailored to his frame in a way that spoke of custom work rather than off-the-rack purchases, with a white shirt open at the collar revealing a throat she absolutely should not be noticing. Everything about him radiated danger and authority, from the way he stood, completely still while chaos swirled around him, to the way people in the VIP section gave him a respectful distance that suggested fear wrapped in deference. The men flanking him at careful intervals were clearly security, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd with professional vigilance, hands resting near their jackets in positions that suggested concealed weapons. This was someone important. Someone dangerous. Someone Lila absolutely should not be staring at, with her heart hammering and her breath coming faster. But she couldn't look away. Some invisible thread had connected them across the space, and breaking it felt impossible even as every rational instinct screamed that she should turn around, grab Maya, and get as far from this man's attention as possible. He moved then, and Lila watched with fascinated dread as he began making his way down from the VIP section toward the main floor. People parted for him automatically, creating a clear path through the crowd without him having to ask or push. His security detail followed at a discreet distance, close enough to intervene but far enough to give him space. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life, who expected the world to rearrange itself to accommodate his desires, and Lila felt a spark of rebellious irritation cut through the unwanted attraction heating her blood. Maya grabbed her arm, her nails digging in with urgent pressure. "Lila," she hissed directly into her ear, barely audible over the music. "That's Enzo Vitale. As in the Enzo Vitale. As in, he runs half of Manhattan's underground operations and the other half wishes they worked for him instead of against him. As in, you do not want that man's attention unless you're very sure you can handle the consequences." But it was too late for warnings. He'd already closed the distance between them, moving with predatory grace through the crowd until he stood directly in front of Lila, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that mixed with the heat of his skin into an intoxicating combination that made her head swim slightly. Up close, he was even more devastating than he'd been from a distance. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and the height difference made her acutely aware of how much larger he was, how easily he could overpower her if he chose to. But his eyes held no threat, only interest, appreciation, and a dangerous sort of amusement that suggested he knew exactly the effect he was having on her and found it entertaining. "You're the most beautiful woman in this club," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow cut through the music, accent thick and unmistakably Italian despite his perfect English. Each word was deliberate, weighted with meaning beyond the simple compliment. "Dance with me." Not a request. Not a question. A command delivered with the absolute certainty that she'd comply, that no reasonable woman would refuse such an invitation from a man like him. Lila felt that spark of rebellion flare hotter. She'd spent years dealing with entitled men, wealthy restaurant patrons who assumed their money bought them anything they wanted, including the right to be demanding and occasionally handsy with the staff. She'd perfected the art of the gracious refusal, the smile that said, "Thank you but no," without giving offense, the ability to deflect unwanted attention while maintaining her professional composure and ensuring her tips didn't suffer for her boundaries. But this wasn't work, and she didn't owe this man, no matter how gorgeous or powerful, anything resembling gracious compliance. Her eyebrow arched as she crossed her arms, a defensive posture that put physical barriers between them even as it emphasized her curves in the fitted dress she wore. "That's quite an assumption," she replied, pitching her voice to carry over the music without shouting. "Maybe I already have plans. Maybe I'm not interested in dancing with strange men who approach without introduction." Surprise flickered across his features. Genuine shock that lasted only a moment before transforming into something that looked dangerously like delighted interest. "You're refusing me," he said, and it sounded like he was tasting the words, testing their validity against his experience of reality. Observant and forward. What a combination. Lila deliberately turned slightly away from him, back toward Maya, who was watching their interaction with a mixture of horror and fascination painted across her face. "Now if you'll excuse me, I was having a conversation with my friend." She felt rather than saw him move closer, felt the heat of his body as he invaded her personal space with calculated precision. His voice dropped lower, more intimate, meant only for her ears as he spoke directly into her ear in a way that sent involuntary shivers racing down her spine despite her determination to remain unaffected. "What's your name, Principessa?" The Italian endearment rolled off his tongue like honey and smoke, and Lila hated how much she liked the sound of it, how much she wanted to hear him say it again in that voice that promised sin and pleasure in equal measure. "None of your business," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady, to maintain the appearance of complete indifference even though her traitorous body was responding to his proximity with embarrassing enthusiasm. And I'm not your princess or anyone else's. So how about you take your entitlement and your assumptions and find someone else to bother with them? His laugh was low and genuine, rumbling through his chest in a way she could feel through the air separating them. Magnificent, he murmured, still close enough that his breath ghosted across her neck. You have no idea who I am, do you? Should I? Lila finally turned to face him fully, lifting her chin in challenge. She was tall in her heels, but he still had several inches on her, and she refused to be intimidated by the difference. Let me take a guess. Trust fund baby who never heard the word no growing up? Wall Street finance bro who thinks breaking insider trading laws makes you dangerous? Or maybe, she let her gaze travel deliberately over his expensive suit, his perfect hair, his dangerous eyes. Maybe you're in some kind of organized crime and you think that makes you interesting instead of just morally bankrupt. The last guess was closer to the truth than she'd intended, and she saw it register in his eyes, in the way several of his security detail tensed and moved subtly closer. Maya made a small sound of distress beside her, but Lila kept her attention fixed on Enzo, refusing to back down now that she'd committed to this confrontation. The silence stretched between them for several heartbeats, the music fading to background noise as they stared at each other in a battle of wills that felt charged with more than just pride. Then Enzo smiled, a real smile that transformed his face from dangerously handsome to absolutely devastating, and Lila felt her stomach do an unwanted flip at the sight. I'm Enzo Vitale, he said, pronouncing each syllable with clear emphasis like she should recognize the significance. When she continued to stare at him with polite incomprehension, his smile widened into something that looked almost boyish despite his obvious age and experience. You really don't know who I am. Should I be impressed by a name? Lila countered, even as part of her brain registered Maya's earlier warning, started putting pieces together about exactly how dangerous this situation might be. You want me to swoon because you introduced yourself? That's a pretty low bar for excitement. Most women, most people, would be more careful with their words around me. But he said it without threat, more like he was sharing an observation than issuing a warning. His hand came up slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her every opportunity to pull back as he reached toward her face. Lila froze as his fingers traced along her jawline with feather-light pressure, the touch so gentle it shouldn't have affected her but somehow sent electricity sparking across every nerve ending. His skin was warm and slightly rough with calluses that spoke of violence and hard work despite his obvious wealth, and when his thumb brushed across her cheekbone, she couldn't quite suppress the slight intake of breath at the intimacy of the gesture. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, Enzo murmured, his eyes locked on hers with hypnotic intensity, or you have absolutely no sense of self-preservation. I haven't decided which yet, but either way. His thumb traced her lower lip now and Lila's mouth went dry even as liquid heat pooled low in her belly. You're the most interesting person I've encountered in years. Interesting, Lila repeated, fighting to maintain her composure even as her body screamed at her to lean into his touch, to close the distance between them, to find out if his mouth felt as good as it looked. That's a polite way of saying annoying, isn't it? That's a honest way of saying captivating. His hand dropped away from her face, and Lila hated the small sound of protest that nearly escaped her throat at the loss of contact. One dance, Principessa. One conversation. One chance for you to stop thinking about me for the rest of the night, because we both know you will be thinking about me. You'll wonder what would have happened if you'd said yes. You'll replay this moment and question whether you made the right choice. The absolute arrogance of the statement should have infuriated her. Instead, Lila found herself fighting not to smile, found herself intrigued despite every warning bell clanging in her head. You're awfully confident for someone who just got rejected by a woman who doesn't even know who you are. I'm confident because I can see your pulse racing right here. His finger touched the hollow of her throat where her heartbeat thundered visibly beneath her skin. And I can see the way you're leaning toward me even while you're telling me no. Your body knows what your pride won't admit yet. My body doesn't know anything except that it's hot in this club and I've had 2 drinks. But the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. And my pride is perfectly fine with admitting that you're attractive. That doesn't mean I'm interested in dancing with you or anything else you might be offering. Not offering, Principessa. Promising. He leaned in closer, his mouth near her ear, his voice dropping to an intimate rumble that she felt all the way to her toes. I promise that if you give me one dance, one real conversation without this defensive wall you're hiding behind, I'll show you exactly why everyone in this club has been watching us with either envy or fear for the past 5 minutes. I'll show you what it feels like to have my complete attention, my complete focus. And then, if you still want to walk away, if you can honestly say you feel nothing, I'll let you go and never bother you again." It was the last part that surprised her, the acknowledgement that she had a choice, that her rejection would be respected even after everything. Something in his tone suggested he meant it, that despite his obvious power and the dangerous edge that clung to him like cologne, he wouldn't actually force her compliance. Lila pulled back enough to study his face, searching for deception or manipulation and finding only intense interest and surprising sincerity. "And if I say no right now? If I tell you to walk away and leave me alone? Then I walk away." His eyes held hers steadily. "But I'll also leave you my card because I don't think you're going to be able to forget about me any more than I'm going to be able to forget about you. And when curiosity gets the better of that stubborn pride, and it will, Principessa, because you're too intelligent not to wonder, you'll call me." That's quite an assumption about my curiosity. That's an observation based on the fact that you're still standing here arguing with me instead of just turning around and walking away. His smile was knowing, challenging. "You could have left at any point in this conversation. Your friend tried to pull you away twice and you stayed. That tells me everything I need to know about how much you're actually affected by this, by me, regardless of what you're saying." Damn him for being right. Damn him for reading her so easily when she prided herself on being unreadable, on maintaining her composure in any situation. Lila straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met his gaze with all the steel she could muster. "Here's what's going to happen," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the space between them with decisive finality. "You're going to take your confidence and your promises and your presumptions about my curiosity, and you're going to walk away. Find another woman to fascinate with your dangerous mystique and your Italian endearments. I'm not interested in whatever game you're playing, and I'm definitely not interested in being another conquest for someone who clearly has too much money and too much time and not enough respect for the word no." She turned on her heel before he could respond, grabbing Maya's hand and pulling her friend toward the bar on the opposite side of the club. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and her skin still tingled where he'd touched her, but she kept her head high and her steps steady as she put distance between them. "Holy shit," Maya breathed once they'd claimed a spot at the crowded bar. "Did you just reject Enzo Vitale to his face? In his own club? Girl, I don't know if you're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, but that was necessary," Lila finished, signaling the bartender with practiced ease. He needed to hear that no means no, regardless of who he is or how much power he thinks he has. But even as she said it, even as she ordered drinks and tried to pretend her hands weren't shaking slightly with adrenaline and unwanted arousal, Lila could feel his eyes on her from across the club. She didn't look back, refused to give him the satisfaction, but she remained hyper-aware of his presence for the rest of the night, tracking his location in her peripheral vision like prey always knows where the predator lurks. When Maya finally declared she was ready to leave around 2 a.m., both of them tired and slightly drunk and ready for the comfort of their respective beds, Lila felt relief mixed with strange disappointment as they made their way toward the exit. She hadn't seen Enzo in the last hour, had assumed he'd taken her rejection and moved on to easier prey, and she told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was just the letdown of adrenaline leaving her system. They emerged into Manhattan's warm summer night, the air thick with humidity and the smell of the city, exhaust and hot asphalt and a million different restaurants and lives all compressed into these streets. Maya was already on her phone ordering an Uber when Lila noticed the car. A sleek black town car idled at the curb directly in front of the club, so perfectly positioned it couldn't be coincidence. As they approached, the driver's door opened and a man in a professional suit stepped out, holding a small card with Lila's name written on it in elegant script. "Ms. Morgan," he said with perfect courtesy, "Mr. Vitale wanted to ensure you arrived home safely. The car is at your disposal, and there are no expectations or obligations attached. Simply transportation with his compliments." Lila stared at the card, then at the car, then back at the driver's professionally neutral expression. Part of her wanted to refuse on principle, to call her own car and maintain her independence. But it was late, she was tired, and the practical part of her brain that managed budgets and responsibilities noted that this would save her $20 she could put toward her savings instead. "How did he know my name?" she asked, even though she suspected she knew the answer. "Mr. Vitale has resources," the driver replied diplomatically. "Will you accept the ride?" Maya was watching with wide eyes, clearly torn between warning her friend off and being impressed by the gesture. Lila made a decision, probably the wrong one but one she was making anyway, and nodded. "Fine. But just a ride home. Nothing else." The interior of the town car was luxurious, Soft leather seats that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, the subtle scent of expensive cleaning products and newness. On the seat beside her sat a bottle of high-end water, still chilled, and a single red rose wrapped in black silk ribbon. Attached to the ribbon was another card, this one bearing a handwritten message in bold, masculine script that she recognized from the name on the first card. Next time, Principessa. And there will be a next time. You made this interesting and I've always loved a challenge. Sweet dreams, Enzo Vitale. Below the message was a phone number written in the same confident hand. Lila should have crumpled the card, should have left it in the car or thrown it away the moment she got home. Instead, she found herself tucking it carefully into her purse, her fingers tracing the letters of his name as the car glided smoothly through Manhattan's late-night streets. The driver deposited her at her modest apartment building in Queens with perfect courtesy, refusing the tip she tried to offer and simply nodding politely before driving away into the night. Lila climbed the 3 flights to her tiny studio apartment, letting herself in and leaning against the closed door as she finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened. She'd just rejected one of the most powerful and dangerous men in New York. She'd stood her ground against someone who clearly wasn't used to hearing no, had maintained her composure and her pride in the face of devastating attraction and uncomfortable awareness. She should feel proud of herself, vindicated that she'd stuck to her principles. Instead, she felt restless and unsettled, her body still humming with unused energy, her mind replaying every moment of their encounter. The way he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the crowded club, the gentleness of his touch against her face, the promise in his voice when he'd told her there would be a next time. Lila prepared for bed mechanically, washing her face and changing into sleep clothes without really registering her actions. But when she finally slid between her sheets, she found herself staring at her phone on the nightstand, at the card with his number that she'd placed next to it like a talisman or a test. She wouldn't call. She absolutely would not call. This was just attraction mixed with adrenaline, the natural response to someone forbidden and dangerous. It would pass. She'd forget about Enzo Vitale and his dark eyes and his Italian accent and the way he'd called her Principessa like the word meant something sacred. But even as she told herself these things, even as she closed her eyes and tried to sleep, Lila knew she was lying. His final words echoed in her mind, "There will be a next time," and despite everything, despite her better judgment and her determination to remain unmoved, some part of her thrilled at the promise. Across the city, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Manhattan's glittering skyline, Enzo Vitale stood with a glass of scotch in his hand and a smile on his face that his second-in-command Marco had never quite seen before. "The background check came back," Marco said, holding out a tablet with Lila's information displayed across the screen. "Nothing concerning. Clean record, no debts beyond student loans, works 2 jobs to help her mother with medical expenses. By all accounts, she's exactly what she appears to be, a hard-working young woman trying to make her way in an expensive city." Enzo took the tablet, his eyes scanning the information with the same intensity he brought to every business decision. But this wasn't business. This was something else entirely, something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. "She challenged me," he said more to himself than to Marco. "She looked at me and saw past the power and the reputation and just challenged me. Do you know how rare that is? Boss, with all due respect, she rejected you. Pretty thoroughly from what I observed. Are you sure pursuing this is wise? There are plenty of women who would be thrilled to have your attention without all the resistance." "That's exactly the point, Marco." Enzo set down the tablet and took a sip of scotch, savoring the burn. "I don't want women who are thrilled to have my attention. I don't want easy compliance or practiced seduction. I want her, with her fire and her pride and her complete fearlessness in the face of something that terrifies most people. She's perfect. And if she continues to refuse? Then I'll convince her otherwise." Enzo's smile widened, predatory and pleased. "I told her there would be a next time and I always keep my promises. Lila Morgan has no idea what she started tonight, but she will. She absolutely will." He'd learned enough from the background check to know where she worked, where she lived, what mattered to her. He'd learned about her design dreams and her student loans and her mother's medical bills. He'd learned about her loyalty and her determination and the way she'd worked herself ragged for 4 years trying to achieve something that remained frustratingly out of reach. And Enzo Vitale, who'd spent his entire adult life taking what he wanted through a combination of charm, intimidation, and strategic violence, found himself planning a campaign more careful and more calculated than any business acquisition. Because this wasn't business. This was something that felt dangerously like fate, like destiny, like the kind of connection he'd stopped believing existed outside of movies and romance novels. She'd rejected him tonight. But tomorrow was a new day, and Enzo had never accepted defeat gracefully. If Lila Morgan wanted a chase, he'd give her one. If she wanted to be convinced rather than commanded, he'd adjust his approach. But make no mistake, she would be his. The only question was how long it would take her to accept what he'd known from the moment their eyes met across that crowded club. They were inevitable. The game had begun. And Enzo Vitale had never lost a game that mattered. 4 days passed with Lila jumping at every unexpected sound, scanning every crowd for dark eyes and dangerous smiles that never materialized. She told herself she was relieved. She told herself that Enzo Vitale had obviously taken her rejection at face value and moved on to easier conquests, women who would welcome his attention instead of fighting it at every turn. She told herself that the strange disappointment she felt every time her phone remained silent was just her pride being offended that he hadn't tried harder, not actual longing for contact from a man she'd definitively rejected. She told herself a lot of things, and every single one of them was a lie. The card with his number remained in her purse like it was burning a hole through the leather, and Lila found her fingers drifting to it at odd moments. During her morning subway commute, on her lunch break from the design temp work she picked up between restaurant shifts, lying in bed at night when sleep remained frustratingly elusive and her mind kept replaying their encounter with obsessive detail. She hadn't called. She wouldn't call. But she also couldn't quite bring herself to throw the card away, to sever that last tenuous connection to a night that had felt more alive and electric than anything she'd experienced in years. By Thursday evening, Lila had almost convinced herself that the whole thing was behind her, filed away as an interesting story she'd tell at parties someday about the time she'd rejected a Mafia boss and lived to tell the tale. She arrived at Celestino's for her dinner shift with her usual professionalism firmly in place, tying on her black apron and checking her section assignments with the efficiency of someone who'd done this routine thousands of times before. The restaurant hummed with its typical Thursday energy, wealthy patrons celebrating the near weekend with expensive wine and multi-course meals, the soft notes of a piano drifting from the corner where a musician in a tuxedo played classical pieces, crystal chandeliers casting warm golden light across white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. Lila had always appreciated the old-world elegance of Celestino's, the way it made her feel like she'd stepped into a different era where things moved slower and beauty mattered more than efficiency. She was 3 hours into her shift, delivering entrees to a party of 6 in her section, when that familiar prickle of awareness crawled across her skin with such intensity that she nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Lila finished serving the table on autopilot, her professional smile never wavering even as her heart rate kicked into overdrive and her hands began trembling slightly with adrenaline and anticipation and dread all mixed into one overwhelming sensation. She turned toward the source of that feeling and found him. Enzo Vitale sat in the corner booth of her section. The prime table, the one that offered privacy and an excellent view of the entire restaurant, the one that was technically reserved for VIPs who made reservations months in advance but somehow now contained a man who'd obviously simply decided he wanted it and made it happen through sheer force of will or money or threat. He wore another immaculate suit, charcoal gray this time, that made his dark eyes look even more intense, and he was watching her with an expression that somehow managed to combine satisfaction, hunger, and challenge into something that made her entire body flush with heat. 2 of his security detail occupied nearby tables, dressed more casually but still obviously professional protection, their eyes constantly scanning the room with practiced vigilance. The other diners had noticed his arrival. Lila could see it in the way conversations had gotten slightly more subdued, in the nervous energy that rippled through the staff, in the way her manager Antonio was practically hovering near the hostess stand like he expected trouble and wanted to be positioned to handle it before it escalated. Lila took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and marched over to Enzo's booth with as much dignity as she could muster while her traitorous heart hammered against her ribs and her mouth went dry with a combination of attraction and irritation. She stopped at the edge of his table, notepad and pen in hand, her expression carefully neutral even as she fought to keep her voice steady. "You're stalking me," she said without preamble, keeping her voice low enough that nearby tables wouldn't overhear but loud enough that he couldn't miss the accusation in her tone. "This isn't coincidence. This is you tracking down where I work and deliberately showing up in my section." Enzo's smile was slow and devastating, transforming his face from dangerously handsome to absolutely breathtaking in a way that made her forget momentarily why she was supposed to be annoyed with him. "I'm having dinner," he replied smoothly, his accent thick and warm like honey, "at a restaurant that's been highly recommended to me by multiple sources. Is there some law against that, Principessa?" "Don't call me that." But the protest sounded weak even to her own ears, especially when her body responded to the endearment with a flutter low in her stomach that she absolutely could not afford to acknowledge right now. Why not? It suits you perfectly. A princess who doesn't yet realize she's already standing in my kingdom, that everywhere you go in this city, you're walking through territory I control or influence. His eyes traveled over her face with leisurely appreciation, cataloging every detail like he was committing her to memory. You look beautiful in your uniform, by the way. Professional and untouchable, which makes me want to mess you up until that careful composure cracks and you stop pretending you don't feel this thing between us. Heat flooded Lila's face and other parts of her anatomy she was trying very hard not to think about right now. Your ego really is astronomical. I rejected you 4 days ago. That usually sends a pretty clear message to most people with normal social awareness. I'm not most people. And your rejection just made this more interesting. He leaned back in the booth, utterly relaxed despite the tension crackling in the air between them. I told you there would be a next time. Here I am. Here you are. Destiny, don't you think? I think you have too much money and too much time and an unhealthy obsession with women who reject you. Lila flipped open her notepad with more force than necessary, her professional mask sliding firmly into place even as her pulse raced. What can I get you to drink, Mr. Vitale? His smile widened at her attempt to maintain professional distance, clearly amused by her tactics. Macallan 25 neat. And whatever you recommend for dinner, I trust your taste implicitly. You don't know anything about my taste. On the contrary, I know quite a bit about your taste, Lila Catherine Morgan. Her full name on his lips made her freeze, made her understand exactly how much research he'd done in the 4 days since their first meeting. I know you prefer sustainable fashion over fast fashion, quality over quantity. I know you spend your rare days off visiting art galleries and museums instead of shopping or partying. I know your favorite restaurant is that little Thai place in Queens near your apartment that doesn't look like much from the outside but makes the best pad thai you've ever had. I know you send money to your mother every month to help with her medical expenses even though she doesn't ask and you can barely afford it. I know you graduated top of your class from Parsons and that you have a design portfolio that would make established fashion houses jealous if they ever saw it. Lila's hands trembled as she processed his words, as she understood the full extent of his investigation into her life. Anger warred with violation and unwanted attraction, creating a toxic cocktail of emotions that made her voice shake when she finally found it. You had no right to invade my privacy like that. You had no right to dig into my life without my permission. I had every right. You're going to be important to me, Lila. You are already important to me whether you've accepted that yet or not. His expression softened slightly, something genuine flickering in those dark eyes. And I protect what's mine, which means I need to know everything. Who you are, what matters to you, what threatens you, what you dream about when you think no one's listening. I am not yours. But even as she said it, even as she fought to maintain her anger and her boundaries, part of her thrilled at the possessive certainty in his voice, at being claimed so absolutely by someone so powerful. Not yet, Enzo agreed, reaching out to catch her wrist with gentle fingers that nonetheless held her in place with effortless strength. His thumb found her pulse point, pressing lightly against the racing beat that betrayed everything her words denied. But you will be. Because your body already knows what your mind won't admit yet. Feel that. He pressed slightly harder against her pulse. Your heart is racing. You're leaning toward me even while you're trying to pull away. Your pupils are dilated and I can see the flush spreading down your throat. These are all signs of arousal, Principessa, of attraction you're fighting but can't quite suppress. Lila yanked her wrist free with more force than necessary, stepping back and nearly colliding with another server who was passing behind her with a tray of drinks. You're delusional if you think physiological responses mean I want anything to do with you. My heart is racing because I'm angry, not because I'm attracted to some entitled criminal who thinks stalking is romantic. Then why haven't you thrown away my card? The question was soft, knowing, cutting straight through her defenses with surgical precision. Why do you still carry it in your purse? Why do you touch it when you think no one's watching, trace my name with your fingers like you're trying to memorize the shape of the letters? How the hell did he know that? Lila's eyes widened as she processed the implications, as she understood that his surveillance had been even more thorough than she'd realized. You've been watching me. Actually following me, tracking my movements. Protecting you, Enzo corrected firmly. There's a difference. My world is dangerous, Lila, and the moment I decided you were mine, the moment I made my interest in you publicly known at that club, you became a potential target for anyone who wants to hurt me. So yes, I've had people ensuring your safety. Making sure no one approaches you with ill intent, that you get home safe at night, that the world doesn't touch you while I'm figuring out how to convince you to stop fighting what's inevitable between us. The casual admission of surveillance should have terrified her. Should have sent her running to the police or at minimum to her manager to have him removed from the restaurant. Instead, Lila found herself caught between outrage and unwanted gratitude, between anger at the invasion and security at the protection, between determination to maintain her independence and curiosity about what it would feel like to surrender to someone so absolutely dedicated to claiming her. Before she could formulate a response, any response that made sense of the chaos in her head, movement at the restaurant entrance caught her attention. A woman had just walked in, and even from across the dining room, Lila could feel the shift in energy, could see the way Enzo's expression went carefully blank in a way that suggested this was not a welcome interruption. The woman was stunning in that effortless way that came from generations of wealth and privilege, tall and slim with perfect posture, dressed in designer everything from her shoes to her jewelry, dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon that probably required a professional stylist to achieve. She moved through the restaurant with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything in her life, her eyes locked on Enzo's booth with laser focus that ignored everyone and everything else. "Enzo," the woman said when she reached them, her voice cultured and cold, her accent suggesting European boarding schools and finishing classes. She spared Lila only the briefest dismissive glance before focusing entirely on Enzo. "We need to talk. Now. You've been avoiding my calls for 2 weeks and I'm tired of being patient. Alessandra." Enzo's voice was carefully neutral, revealing nothing. "This is unexpected. And unwelcome. Is it? You don't get to simply decide we're finished and expect me to accept that without discussion." Alessandra's gaze finally landed properly on Lila, raking over her server uniform with obvious disdain and dismissal. "I see you found new entertainment. How quaint. Very pretty woman of you, though I hope you don't actually expect this to go anywhere beyond a few amusing evenings." The condescension in her tone sparked immediate fury in Lila's chest, overriding her earlier confusion and uncertainty with clear bright anger. She'd dealt with enough entitled rich people in her years serving tables to recognize the type. Someone who measured human worth by bank accounts and social standing, who saw service workers as interchangeable and disposable, beneath notice except when they failed to provide adequate service. "I'm not entertainment," Lila said evenly, meeting Alessandra's gaze with steel in her own. "I'm working. And you're interrupting both my job and what was, until about 30 seconds ago, an actual conversation. So if you'll excuse me, I have other tables to attend to." She turned to leave, but Enzo's hand shot out faster than should have been possible, catching hers in a grip that was gentle but absolutely unyielding. "Stay," he said, and it wasn't quite a command but it also wasn't quite a request. "Please, Lila. Stay." The please surprised her. Surprised her enough that she hesitated instead of pulling away immediately, surprised her enough that she looked back at his face and saw something there beyond his usual confidence and control, something that looked almost like vulnerability, like he genuinely wanted her to stay not because he commanded it but because her presence mattered to him in some way she didn't quite understand yet. But Alessandra was watching with calculating eyes, clearly cataloging the interaction and drawing conclusions that made Lila's skin crawl with discomfort. This was messy and complicated and absolutely not something she wanted to be in the middle of, especially not during her work shift where half the restaurant was now watching their interaction with barely concealed interest. "Handle your business, Mr. Vitale," Lila said firmly, extracting her hand from his grip with deliberate care. "I'll send someone else to take your order." She walked away before he could protest further, before she could see his reaction or let Alessandra's knowing smile burrow any deeper under her skin. Her hands shook as she entered the kitchen, her mind spinning with emotions she couldn't quite name or organize into anything resembling coherent thought. Jealousy. She was jealous of Alessandra, which was absolutely ridiculous because she'd rejected Enzo, had told him in no uncertain terms that she wasn't interested, had no claim on him or his attention or his past relationships. But seeing that beautiful, sophisticated woman standing beside him, clearly intimate with him in ways that spoke of shared history and comfortable familiarity, it made something ugly twist in Lila's gut, made her want to march back out there and stake a claim she had no right to make. She avoided Enzo's section for the rest of her shift, sending her colleague Marcus to handle the table with whispered apologies and a $20 bribe to not ask questions about why she couldn't do it herself. Through Marcus, she learned that Alessandra had stayed, sitting possessively close to Enzo throughout his meal, her hand occasionally touching his arm in ways that suggested ownership and intimate knowledge. Through Marcus, she learned that Enzo had barely touched his food, his attention constantly wandering to wherever Lila moved through the restaurant like he was tracking her even while pretending to engage with his ex. When her shift finally ended at 11 p.m., Lila changed quickly in the cramped staff bathroom, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt over her uniform and shoving her work clothes into her bag with mechanical efficiency. She slipped out the back entrance into the service alley, hoping to avoid any potential confrontation, her mind already on the subway ride home and the comfort of her own bed where she could process everything without an audience. She made it exactly 3 steps before strong arms caught her around the waist. Lila's gasp of surprise cut off as she registered his scent, his warmth, the particular way he held her that was somehow already becoming familiar despite the limited time they'd spent in close proximity. "Enzo, put me down right now." "Not a chance, Principessa." And then she was being lifted effortlessly off her feet, thrown over his shoulder like she weighed absolutely nothing, his arm banding across the backs of her thighs to hold her securely in place. "You've been avoiding me all evening. Running away from conversations we need to have. That ends now. This is insane." Lila pushed against his back, her face flaming with embarrassment and outrage and unwanted arousal all mixed together into one overwhelming sensation. "You can't just manhandle me like some caveman. We talked about this, I told you no more caveman routines." His hand came down on her backside in a sharp smack that was more shocking than painful, the sound echoing off the alley walls in a way that made Lila freeze in mortification. "That was before you spent 4 hours running away from me and letting another man serve my table. Consider the no caveman agreement temporarily suspended until you stop being stubborn and talk to me like an adult." Another smack, this one slightly harder, placed with deliberate precision that sent heat flooding through her body in a way that absolutely should not feel good but somehow did. Lila made a sound that was half protest and half something she refused to acknowledge, her body going pliant over his shoulder even as her mind screamed at her to fight harder. Are you actually?" She couldn't even finish the sentence, too shocked and turned on and infuriated to form coherent words. "Spanking you?" "Yes." Enzo was moving toward a waiting black SUV, his stride confident and unhurried despite carrying her weight. "And from that sound you just made, I don't think you mind nearly as much as you're pretending to. In fact, Principessa, I think you liked it. I think you liked being handled, liked having the choice taken away for a moment, liked surrendering control to someone strong enough to take it." "I hate you," Lila muttered, but it sounded breathless and insincere even to her own ears, especially when her body was responding with enthusiastic approval to every word, every touch, every display of casual dominance. "No, you don't." He deposited her in the back seat of the SUV with surprising gentleness given how roughly he'd just manhandled her, sliding in beside her before she could escape. The driver pulled away from the curb immediately, the privacy screen already raised between front and back seats, leaving them alone in the leather-scented darkness. "But you're going to drive yourself insane trying to maintain this pretense that you don't want me, that you don't think about me constantly, that you didn't spend the entire evening hyper-aware of exactly where I was and what I was doing." Lila pressed against the opposite door, her chest heaving with exertion and emotion, glaring at him in the dim interior even as her body betrayed her by tingling everywhere he'd touched. "What the hell was that? You can't just throw me over your shoulder and carry me off like we're living in some historical romance novel. There are laws against kidnapping. It's not kidnapping when you didn't actually try to stop me." Enzo's eyes glittered with challenge and satisfaction in equal measure. "You could have screamed. The alley wasn't empty, there were people within earshot who would have heard and intervened. You could have fought harder, really tried to get away instead of those token protests. But you didn't, Lila. Because some part of you wanted this, wanted me to stop letting you run and make you face what's happening between us." The accuracy of his observation made her angrier, made her lash out with the only weapon she had left. "What about Alessandra? Your ex who's clearly not as ex as you claimed? She seemed pretty comfortable staking her claim tonight, pretty confident that you'd welcome her back. Was that all part of your plan? Pursue me while keeping her on the hook as backup in case I don't fall at your feet like apparently every other woman does?" Satisfaction flickered across Enzo's face at her obvious jealousy, and Lila immediately regretted giving him that ammunition. "Alessandra is my past. We ended things 2 months ago, and she's having difficulty accepting that reality. Her showing up tonight was unwelcome and uninvited. I've made it clear repeatedly that we're finished, but she continues to push boundaries and ignore my explicit statements that I've moved on." "Moved on to what?" "To stalking waitresses and playing games." "To you." He moved closer, caging her against the door with his body but not quite touching, giving her space to breathe even as he made escape impossible. I've moved on to you, Lila. To this fire between us that you feel just as strongly as I do. To this connection that terrified you enough to make you run but that you can't actually escape no matter how hard you try. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her flushed cheek with devastating gentleness. Who was she? Lila heard herself ask, hating how vulnerable the question sounded. Really? Who is Alessandra to you? Someone I cared for but never loved. Someone who understood my world and my obligations but never challenged me, never pushed back, never made me want to be better than I am. His eyes held hers with hypnotic intensity. She was safe and predictable and ultimately forgettable. You're none of those things. You're brave and stubborn and so beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes. You challenge me with every breath, push back against every assumption, make me work for every inch of ground I gain. And that's exactly what I need, what I've been looking for without knowing it until you looked at me across that club and refused to be impressed. I don't want to be a conquest, Lila whispered, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his words, his attention, the sheer intensity of his focus. I don't want to be the latest challenge you overcome and then lose interest in once the novelty wears off. You're not a conquest, Principessa. You're an inevitability. His other hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back gently but inexorably. You're the woman I'm going to marry someday, the one I'm going to build a life with, the only person I want waking up beside me for the rest of my life. I knew it the moment you challenged me, and nothing that's happened since has changed that certainty, it's only made it stronger. That's insane. We barely know each other. Then let me know you. Give me a real chance, not this defensive wall you're hiding behind. His forehead rested against hers, his breath mingling with hers in the small space between them. 7 days, Lila. Give me 7 days to prove this is real, that what I feel isn't going to fade or disappear. 7 full days where you stop running and actually let me show you what we could be together. And at the end of it, if you honestly want to walk away, if you can look me in the eye and tell me you feel nothing, I'll let you go. Completely. No more pursuing, no more showing up where you work, no more surveillance or protection or any of it. You'll never see me again if that's what you truly want. It was the last part that broke through her final defenses. The genuine offer to walk away, the acknowledgement that her choice mattered even after everything. Lila studied his face in the dim light, searching for deception or manipulation and finding only intense sincerity mixed with barely restrained hunger. What exactly would these 7 days entail? She asked carefully, her voice steadier than she felt. Everything and nothing. His thumb traced her lower lip, and Lila couldn't suppress the small gasp at the intimacy of the gesture. Dates where we actually talk and get to know each other. Time spent together without the defensive walls you throw up every time I get too close. Me showing you that I'm serious about this, about you, that you're not a game or a conquest but someone I genuinely want in my life. And yes, physical intimacy if and when you're ready. I won't lie and pretend I don't want you, that I don't think about touching you constantly. But only when you want it too, when you're ready to admit you want me as much as I want you. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed his offer, as she weighed risk against reward, safety against desire, logic against the undeniable pull she felt toward this dangerous, complicated man. Every rational instinct screamed that she should refuse, that getting involved with someone like Enzo Vitale was asking for heartbreak at best and actual danger at worst. But staring into his eyes, feeling the heat of his body so close to hers, remembering the empty disappointment of the last 4 days when she'd convinced herself he'd moved on, she found her resistance crumbling like sand against tide. Fine, she heard herself say, shocking herself with the decision even as she made it. 7 days. But I have conditions. Name them. His eyes lit with triumph and satisfaction that he didn't bother hiding. No more caveman routines unless I specifically ask for them. No making decisions for me or assuming you know what's best. If I say stop, you stop immediately. And, she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. If at the end of this week I still want to walk away, you let me go. Completely. No stalking, no pursuing, no sending cars or protection or any of it. You respect my decision even if you don't like it. Deal? Enzo studied her for a long moment, something like respect mingling with desire in his expression. Then he extended his hand formally. Deal, Principessa. 7 days starting right now. And at the end of it, you're going to realize what I already know, that you're mine and I'm yours and fighting it is just wasting time we could spend being happy together. Lila took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of violence alongside the gentleness he showed only to her. When she tried to pull away after shaking, he held fast, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her palm that sent electricity racing up her arm and liquid heat pooling low in her belly. "Where are we going?" she asked, suddenly aware the car was still moving through Manhattan streets. "My penthouse. To talk, to spend time together, to start these 7 days properly." At her skeptical look, he laughed, that real laugh that transformed his face and made her heart flip. "Just talk tonight, Lila. I'm not going to seduce you in the first hours of our agreement. I have more finesse than that, and besides..." His eyes darkened with promise. "When we finally come together, when you finally surrender and admit you want this as much as I do, I want you absolutely certain. No doubts, no fears, no wondering if I'm just pushing for physical intimacy. Just you and me and everything we're building." The car pulled up to the same luxury building she remembered from 4 nights ago, and Enzo helped her out with a courtesy that contrasted sharply with his earlier manhandling. They rode the private elevator in charged silence, the air between them crackling with possibility and promise, with the weight of a decision made and a path chosen that would change everything. When the elevator doors opened into his penthouse, Lila took a deep breath and stepped forward into the beginning of 7 days that would either prove her right to resist or prove Enzo right that they were inevitable. The only question was which outcome terrified her more. The next 5 days passed in a blur that left Lila's world fundamentally transformed, her carefully constructed defenses systematically dismantled by a man who proved as patient and attentive as he was possessive and demanding. Enzo kept his promises. No more caveman routines, no decisions made without her input, but also relentless pursuit of her time, her attention, her slowly crumbling resistance to the connection building between them with every hour they spent together. He courted her properly, old-world style mixed with modern luxury. Morning coffee appeared at her door with handwritten notes in Italian that made her smile even when she had to Google translate them. Lunch breaks became opportunities for surprise picnics in hidden gardens she'd never known existed in Manhattan's concrete jungle. Evenings transformed into exploration, quiet dinners at restaurants that weren't in any guidebook, midnight walks through Central Park with his security maintaining discreet distance. One memorable afternoon at the Met where he'd listened with genuine fascination as she analyzed fashion exhibits and explained sustainable design principles. They talked constantly, building layers of intimacy and understanding that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with genuine compatibility. Enzo proved surprisingly well-read, capable of discussing everything from classical literature to contemporary politics with intelligence that matched his street smarts. He asked about her designs, her dreams, her relationship with her mother, and listened with complete attention like every word mattered, like she mattered in ways that went beyond physical desire. And Lila found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her fears about never achieving her dreams, her guilt over her father's abandonment and whether she'd somehow caused it, her loneliness in a city of millions where she'd never quite felt like she belonged. Enzo absorbed it all, offered comfort without empty platitudes, shared his own vulnerabilities in return. The pressure of his position, the weight of responsibility for hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions, the isolation of power that made genuine connection nearly impossible. "Everyone wants something from me," he'd said one night as they sat on his penthouse terrace overlooking the glittering city. "Money, protection, favor, access. You're the first person in years who's wanted nothing except honesty. Who sees past what I can do for you to who I actually am underneath all the power and danger." The physical tension remained constant but controlled. Enzo touched her frequently, casual brushes of hands that lingered, his arm around her waist as they walked, her fingers playing with his hair when they sat close together watching movies. Each touch stoked the fire higher, building anticipation for when they'd finally stop holding back. But true to his word, he never pushed beyond kissing, content to leave her breathless and wanting at the end of each evening before sending her home in his car with promises that made her toes curl and her body ache with unfulfilled need. "When we finally come together," he'd murmured against her lips the night before, his control visibly fraying as she pressed against him, "I want you absolutely certain. No doubts, no fears, no wondering if it's too fast or if you'll regret it in the morning. Just you and me and everything we're building." It was day 5 when Alessandra reappeared, and everything started unraveling. Lila had spent the afternoon at Enzo's penthouse. They'd been cooking together, laughing as he proved surprisingly inept at following recipes despite his obvious skill with everything else, flour somehow ending up in her hair and tomato sauce on his shirt. It felt domestic and comfortable in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. This glimpse of what a future together might look like if she let herself fully surrender to what was building between them. They were debating the proper way to layer lasagna when the private elevator chimed, and they both looked up in surprise. Enzo's expression darkened immediately as the doors opened to reveal Alessandra, still possessing the security codes he'd apparently failed to revoke despite his claims of being finished with her. "Cozy," Alessandra said coldly, her gaze raking over Lila's casual jeans and borrowed shirt, the intimate domestic scene in his normally pristine kitchen. How utterly domestic you've become, Enzo. How unlike the man I knew for 2 years. Leave, Alessandra. Enzo moved to stand between her and Lila, his voice hard with warning. I've told you repeatedly we're finished. You cannot continue showing up uninvited. I've been patient out of respect for what we had, but that patience is exhausted. Finished? We were together for 2 years. You don't just throw that away for her. Her eyes landed on Lila with contempt and dismissal. For her. Some temporary fascination, a walk on the wild side before you come back to your real life, your real obligations. Did you tell her about the engagement your family expects? About Bianca D'Angelo and the alliance that's been planned since you were children? The words hit Lila like physical blows, each one landing with precision designed to wound and destabilize. Enzo's face went carefully blank in a way that told her there was truth somewhere in Alessandra's poison, that he hadn't told her everything about his world and his obligations. Get out, Enzo growled, danger radiating from every line of his body. Security will escort you down and ensure you can never access this building again. And Alessandra? If you come near Lila again, if you even think about interfering in my life further, I will make you regret it in ways that will haunt you for years. Do you understand me? For a moment, Alessandra looked like she might argue, might push further. But something in Enzo's expression, the absolute finality, the barely leashed violence, made her deflate slightly. She cast one last venomous look at Lila before turning and stalking to the elevator, her parting shot delivered over her shoulder with calculated cruelty. Enjoy your little adventure, Lila. But don't get too comfortable. His world will chew you up and spit you out, and when it does, don't expect him to choose you over everything he's built. Men like Enzo don't marry waitresses with design dreams. They marry women who can help them consolidate power and maintain their position. You're just a pleasant distraction until reality reasserts itself. The elevator doors closed on her words, leaving silence in their wake that felt heavy and suffocating. Lila stood frozen, her mind processing everything Alessandra had said, all the doubt and fear she'd been suppressing for 5 days suddenly flooding back with overwhelming force. Lila, Enzo reached for her but she stepped back, creating distance between them for the first time in days. Is it true? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. About Bianca D'Angelo and an expected engagement? About obligations you haven't told me about? Enzo's jaw clenched, and the fact that he didn't immediately deny it told her everything she needed to know. It's complicated. Yes, there's an expectation from certain members of my family that I'll eventually marry Bianca to strengthen alliances between our organizations. But that's their expectation, not mine. I've never agreed to it, never even entertained the possibility seriously. But you also never mentioned it to me. In 5 days of supposedly being honest and building something real, you never thought to tell me that there's another woman in the background who your family expects you to marry? Lila's hands trembled as she processed the implications. What else haven't you told me, Enzo? What other convenient truths have you left out while you've been courting me and making promises about forever? Nothing that matters. Nothing that changes what's happening between us. He moved closer, and Lila saw genuine fear flicker across his features. Fear that she was slipping away, that Alessandra's poison was working exactly as intended. Lila, please. Don't let her get in your head. Don't let her destroy what we're building with doubts and half-truths designed to hurt you. Half-truths. Lila laughed, but it sounded bitter and wrong. She told me about an engagement expectation and you just confirmed it's real. That's not half-truth, that's full reality that you chose not to share. What else is real that you haven't told me? What other obligations and expectations are lurking in your world that I don't know about because you've been so busy seducing me that honesty became optional? I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right moment, for when we were solid enough that you'd understand it doesn't matter, that my family's expectations mean nothing compared to what I want, what I choose. Enzo's hands fisted at his sides, frustration and desperation bleeding into his voice. I love you, Lila. I've fallen completely in love with you in these 5 days and nothing, not family expectations, not alliance politics, not anything in my world, is more important than that. The confession should have melted her resistance, should have made everything okay. But all Lila could hear was Alessandra's voice pointing out the obvious truth she'd been avoiding. She didn't belong in Enzo's world, couldn't navigate the politics and expectations and danger that came with loving someone like him. Maybe that's the problem, she said quietly, backing toward the elevator. Maybe 5 days isn't long enough to build something real when our worlds are so different. Maybe Alessandra's right, I'm just a pleasant distraction, and eventually reality will reassert itself and you'll have to choose between me and everything you've built, everything your position requires. No. Enzo closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. Don't do this. Don't run because you're scared. We agreed to 7 days, you still have 2 left. Use them. Let me prove that none of those expectations matter, that I choose you over all of it. I need time to think. Lila pulled away from his touch even though it hurt, even though every instinct screamed at her to stay, to trust, to take the leap. Time away from you and your intensity and all of this, she gestured at the penthouse, at the life he was offering. So I can figure out if this is real or if I'm just getting swept up in something that will destroy me when it inevitably falls apart. Pain flashed across Enzo's face, raw and unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. You're running. After everything, after 5 days of building something real, you're letting fear win. Maybe fear is smart, Lila shot back, her own pain and confusion making her cruel. Maybe fear is what keeps people like me from getting destroyed by people like you. Maybe I should have listened to it from the beginning instead of letting you charm your way past every defense I had. She hit the elevator button before he could respond, before she could see the full impact of her words. The doors opened immediately, his private elevator always ready, and Lila stepped inside, forcing herself not to look back at him even as every cell in her body screamed at her to stay. This doesn't change anything, Enzo said as the doors began closing, his voice rough with emotion. I love you. That's not going away just because you're scared. Take your time, take your space, but know that I'll be here when you're ready to stop running. The elevator doors closed on his words, and Lila sagged against the wall, tears finally spilling down her cheeks as the reality of what she'd just done crashed over her. She'd walked away from the best thing that had ever happened to her because she was terrified it was too good to be true, because Alessandra's poison had found fertile ground in her existing insecurities. The next 2 days were hell. Enzo called and texted constantly, not angry or demanding, just persistent reminders that he loved her, that he was waiting, that their 7 days weren't up yet and she'd promised to see it through. Lila ignored most of them, threw herself into work, tried to convince herself she'd made the right decision even as everything felt hollow and wrong without him. It was late evening on day 7, exactly 1 week since their deal, when everything exploded and forced her hand. Lila was closing up Celestino's, moving through the empty dining room to complete her final checks before locking up for the night. Antonio had left an hour ago, trusting her with the responsibility because she'd done it dozens of times before. The restaurant was quiet, peaceful in a way it never was during service, and Lila found herself lost in thought about Enzo and whether she'd made a terrible mistake walking away. She didn't hear them enter, didn't realize she wasn't alone until a hand clamped over her mouth and strong arms yanked her backward with brutal efficiency. Terror exploded through her system as she struggled against her captor, her muffled screams going nowhere against the palm covering her mouth. 3 men, professional, dangerous, guns visible in shoulder holsters, surrounded her with practiced coordination that spoke of military or criminal training. Message for Enzo Vitale, the one holding her said, his accent thick and Eastern European. Time he learns what happens when you take our territory, when you cross the Kozlov family. His woman pays the price. They were dragging her toward the back exit when the front windows exploded inward with a deafening crash. Glass shattered everywhere as dark figures poured through the opening, and suddenly the quiet restaurant transformed into a war zone. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks that made Lila's ears ring, muzzle flashes that lit the darkness, shouted orders in Italian and English in languages she didn't recognize. Then Enzo was there, moving through the chaos like violence incarnate, his face a mask of fury and fear as he took down 2 of her captors with brutal efficiency. He had a gun, she'd never seen him armed before, had somehow convinced herself he wasn't actually involved in that side of his business despite all evidence to the contrary, and he used it with terrifying competence. Mine, he roared, the word echoing through the destroyed restaurant as he reached her. She's mine, and you've just signed your own death warrant. More gunfire, more shouting, more bodies hitting the floor. Enzo shielded Lila with his own body, returning fire even as he tried to move her toward relative safety. His security team, she recognized Marco and 2 others, had appeared from nowhere, overwhelming the Kozlov men with superior numbers and obvious skill. They almost made it to the exit when the final shot rang out. Enzo jerked, his face contorting with pain as blood bloomed across his left arm high near the shoulder. The impact spun him partially around, but he didn't fall, didn't stop moving. He just kept pushing forward, kept shielding Lila, kept moving toward the door even as he bled. The car, he gritted out to Marco, his voice tight with pain. Get her to the car. Now. Not without you. Lila finally found her voice, fighting against the bodyguard trying to separate them. Her hands reached for Enzo even as blood soaked through his shirt. Enzo, you're shot. I need you safe. He cupped her face with his uninjured hand, his eyes fierce despite the obvious pain. Go, Principessa. Please. Let them get you out of here. But Lila shook her head, her earlier fears and doubts burning away in the face of his injury, in the reality of almost losing him. Not without you. We're leaving together or not at all. Something in her tone, the absolute certainty, the refusal to be separated, made him nod. Together then. Rain had started falling outside, one of those sudden summer storms that turn Manhattan streets to rivers in minutes. They burst out into the downpour, Marco and the security team clearing the way, engines already running in the waiting SUV. Lila helped support Enzo's weight, feeling his blood hot and slick against her hands, her heart hammering with terror that had nothing to do with her own safety and everything to do with the wound in his arm. In the relative safety of the back seat, she ripped off her work apron to press against his wound, her hands shaking. Hospital. We need to get him to a hospital right now. No hospitals, Enzo ground out through clenched teeth, his face pale but his eyes still sharp. Private doctor. Marco has the address. You've been shot. You need proper medical care, not some back alley. Lila. His good hand found hers, gripping tight. Look at me. She met his eyes, tears mixing with rain on her face, and saw everything she'd been running from reflected back at her. Love and devotion and absolute certainty that she was his priority, his choice, his everything. You could have died, she whispered. You almost died because of me, because they wanted to hurt you through me. I'd die 1,000 times before I let them take you. His thumb wiped at her tears even as he winced from the movement. You ran from me, ignored my calls, spent 2 days convincing yourself this wasn't real. But the second I heard you were in danger, nothing else mattered. Not pride, not anger, not hurt feelings. Nothing except getting to you, protecting you, keeping you safe. That's how I know this is real, Principessa. That's how I know we're inevitable. I'm sorry. The words tumbled out between sobs. I'm so sorry. I was scared and stupid, and I let Alessandra get in my head with doubts and fears. I thought I was protecting myself, but all I did was waste 2 days we could have spent together. I love you, Enzo. I'm completely, terrifyingly in love with you, and watching you get shot because of me? Shoo. He pulled her closer despite his injury, pressing his lips to her forehead. You're safe. That's all that matters. We'll figure out the rest, handle the threats, deal with my family's expectations, all of it. But first, let's make sure I'm not bleeding out in the back of my own car. The private doctor met them at a discreet medical facility that clearly catered to Enzo's world regularly. No questions asked, no paperwork filed, just quick efficient treatment from professionals who'd seen gunshot wounds before. The bullet had passed through muscle cleanly, missing bone and major vessels, painful but ultimately not life-threatening with proper care. While the doctor worked, Enzo kept his eyes locked on Lila, his good hand never releasing hers even when the pain made him sweat. You love me, he said, not quite a question. I love you. Completely. Even though it's fast and complicated and dangerous and probably the least sensible decision I've ever made. Lila gripped his hand tighter. I spent 2 days trying to convince myself I was being smart, protecting myself from inevitable heartbreak. But tonight proved I was just being a coward. Because losing you, actually losing you, would destroy me more than any heartbreak ever could. You're not going to lose me. He winced as the doctor began stitches. But Lila, you need to understand what my world really means. Tonight wasn't an anomaly. There will always be threats, always be people who might try to use you to hurt me. I can protect you, will protect you with everything I have. But you need to decide if you can live with that reality. I can live with it. The certainty in her voice surprised them both. What I can't live with is being away from you, pretending this doesn't matter, walking away from something this powerful because I'm scared. So yes, I can live with your world, with the danger and the complications and all of it. As long as we're together. The doctor finished and quietly excused himself, leaving them alone in the sterile room. Enzo shifted on the exam table, pulling Lila closer with his good arm until she stood between his legs, their faces level. Marry me, he said simply. Lila's breath caught. You're still high on pain medication. I'm perfectly clear-headed despite the local anesthetic. His eyes burned with intensity. Marry me, Lila. Not someday when it's convenient or when we've dated a socially acceptable amount of time. As soon as possible. Tonight proved that life's too short and too unpredictable to waste time on conventions and expectations. I love you, I want you, I need you in my life permanently. Say yes. That's the blood loss talking. That's me talking. Clear-headed, completely serious, asking the woman I love to be my wife. His hand cupped her face. I know it's fast. I know by any rational standard we should wait, date longer, build more slowly. But we're not rational, Principessa. We've been inevitable from that first moment, and everything since has just been confirmation of what we both knew. We're meant for this, for each other, for forever. Lila stared at him, her heart so full it hurt, her eyes filling with tears again, but this time from joy rather than fear. You're supposed to be recovering, not proposing. Excellent multitasking. That dangerous smile that had captivated her from the beginning. Besides, I told you, 7 days and you'd be mine. Weeks up. Time to make good on the promise. You're insane. About you? Absolutely. He tugged her closer, mindful of his injury. So is that a yes? Or do I need to bleed more dramatically to convince you? Don't you dare. Lila leaned down to kiss him softly, carefully, pouring everything she felt into the gentle press of lips. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Before I come to my senses and remember all the reasons this is impractical and complicated. His grin was pure triumph and joy. Too late to back out now, Principessa. You're stuck with me. Good. She settled carefully beside him on the exam table, tucking herself against his uninjured side. Now let's get you actually healed before you start planning anything else dramatic. They remained like that as Enzo's medication took full effect and exhaustion finally claimed him. Lila keeping watch over the man who'd claimed her heart in 7 days, who'd proven his devotion with blood and bullets, who'd promised her forever and backed it up with action. When he stirred an hour later, the first thing he said was, "Wife." Practice saying it. Lila laughed despite everything, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty of their future. Wife. Future wife. Soon to be Mrs. Vitale, who's probably making the craziest decision of her life. Best decision, he corrected, pulling her close. Wife. 3 months later. The wedding was intimate but elegant, 50 guests maximum, held at Enzo's estate in the Hamptons with the Atlantic Ocean providing the backdrop. Lila wore a dress she designed herself, sustainable materials transformed into something elegant and timeless that made Enzo's breath catch when she appeared at the end of the makeshift aisle. Her mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, medical bills no longer a source of stress thanks to Enzo's quiet intervention. Maya served as maid of honor, her earlier warnings about dangerous men completely forgotten in the face of obvious devotion and genuine love. Marco stood as best man, his earlier skepticism transformed to cautious approval as he'd watched Enzo's complete transformation around Lila. The ceremony was short, their vows personal and heartfelt, speaking promises of partnership and devotion, of facing whatever came together, of choosing each other every day regardless of obstacles or expectations. When Enzo slipped the ring on her finger, a stunning antique piece with a center diamond that caught light like captured fire, Lila felt the rightness of it settle into her bones like coming home. I love you, Mrs. Vitale, Enzo murmured as they were finally pronounced husband and wife. I love you too, Lila replied, pulling him down for a kiss that was witnessed by their small gathering with applause and catcalls. My impossible, dangerous, perfect husband. The reception flowed with champagne and laughter, with dancing and celebration and the joy of people who genuinely wished them well. But Lila's favorite moment came late in the evening when Enzo pulled her away from the crowd to the private beach, where they walked hand in hand with the ocean whisper beside them and stars overhead. Happy? He asked, the question he'd first posed weeks ago in the chaos of their early days. Disgustingly so. Lila leaned into his warmth. You? More than I ever thought possible. His arm tightened around her waist. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for seeing past the danger to who I actually am, for choosing this life when you could have walked away. Thank you for being patient when I was scared, for pursuing me even when I tried to push you away, for proving that 7 days was all we needed to know this was forever. 7 days, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. And now we have the rest of our lives. They returned to the reception eventually, dancing and celebrating with the people they loved until the night grew late and exhaustion finally caught up with them. In their honeymoon suite, oceanfront, private, perfect, they finally came together as husband and wife with all the passion and tenderness they'd been building for months. Enzo was reverent and demanding in equal measure, mapping her body with hands and mouth like he was discovering territory he'd waited his whole life to claim. Lila met him touch for touch, kiss for kiss, claiming him right back with equal fervor. When they finally joined, moving together with practiced intimacy born of nights spent learning each other thoroughly, it felt like completion, like two pieces finally fitting perfectly together. "I love you," Lila gasped as pleasure built to breaking as he drove her higher with skill and devotion. "Ti amo mio cuore," Enzo groaned, his control fraying. "My heart, my life, my wife. Mine, completely mine." "Yours," Lila agreed, pulling him closer, holding him tighter as they reached the peak together. "Always yours." And as they shattered in unison, crying out each other's names, holding each other through the waves of pleasure and aftershocks, Lila thought about beginnings and forevers, about 7-day deals and lifetime commitments, about a club encounter that had changed everything. Their story had started with her refusal and his pursuit. It continued with surrender and devotion. And it would last forever, built on a foundation of genuine love, mutual respect, and passion that would never fade. 7 days had changed everything. Forever was just beginning. The end. Did Enzo and Lila's 7-day journey leave you breathless? If you were captivated by this intense, passionate romance from their explosive club encounter to their hard-won forever, don't let the story end here. Smash that like button if you loved Lila's fierce independence meeting Enzo's relentless pursuit. Hit subscribe for more spicy mafia romance stories that will keep you up all night, craving more dangerous men and fearless women who refuse to back down. Comment your favorite moment below. The club rejection that started it all? The restaurant carry-off over his shoulder? The dramatic rain-soaked rescue? The injured proposal that sealed their fate? Drop a if you want more stories featuring alpha bosses who meet their match, possessive declarations that make your heart race, and happily ever afters worth fighting for. Share this with your romance-obsessed friends who need their next binge-worthy obsession. Let's build a community of readers who crave intensity, chemistry that burns through the screen, and love stories that prove sometimes the craziest decisions lead to the best outcomes. What should I write next? Billionaire enemies to lovers? Biker gang romance with redemption arc? Second chance romance with the one who got away? Secret baby surprise that changes everything? Tell me in the comments what tropes make your heart race. Your engagement fuels these stories. Every like tells me you want more. Every comment helps me understand what you love. Every share introduces someone new to our romance-loving community. So if you want more Enzo-level alphas claiming their queens, more Lila-level heroines who refuse to be anyone's doormat, more 7-day challenges that lead to forever, show me some love right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next passionate, pulse-pounding romance. Because life's too short for boring love stories. Let's keep the fire burning together.